Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the start of London Fashion Week, and how different is this one to the last one? And the impact of COVID, how are you able to overcome those challenges?
It is indeed a very different fashion week to what people might have expected, where usually editors from around the world, buyers descend on London, the impact of London around hotels and hospitality and restaurants. And this is very different with travel cancelled. But the principle we've gone on is the show must go on. And designers have really rallied together to produce some unbelievable content. It will be a digital first fashion week, but this season, September, as opposed to June, we're actually adding some physical presentations as well. So it will be a combination of digital and physical, but you can see it all on londonfashionweek.co.uk.
And how has it been working within the government guidelines for the actual physical shows?
The reality is the physical shows will be much more limited in scale to the usual big catwalk shows that you might expect. We've worked very closely with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which is the agency that represents the fashion industry. And we've produced everything within the context of strict COVID guidelines. So it's much more limited number of people. It's by appointment only. There's all the track and trace facilities, but also less hair and makeup and less sort of support staff in the background. And for that reason, we're really focusing on the editors and the buyers and the people for whom the designers have to show their vision to really be part of the physical side, and the consumer and the wider fashion community can get involved on our digital hub.
Stephanie, talking about buyers, how will the international buyers view and will that impact the sales? Will that impact what the designers are showing?
The reality is that we've been thinking for a long time about the evolution of Fashion Week and the purpose. And yes, Fashion Week is both a cultural event. It's a big moment in the yearly fashion calendar for designers to talk about their vision, but it's also a selling moment. And typically we sell, designers sell between 150, 200 million in receipts at Fashion Week itself, and then at other moments throughout the year. So it will have an impact, but we're working with technology. We've partnered with a company called Dure, for example, which allows orders to be placed online, and we can do that through our Fashion Week hub. So the British Fashion Council has always been innovative in its approach to using technology, and we're hoping that that pays off now because we're in a position to bring technology in to solve some of these gaps that we have now.
You yourself have said that the impact of COVID-19 has been devastating. Where has it hit the hardest?
It has been a significant impact to the industry. If you think about at the very start, the consumer demand has dropped. Lockdown has meant that people aren't going to as many events. They're not going to the dinner parties, weddings, for example. So consumer demand has dropped. You've also seen a shift in the category. People are buying less event wear and designer wear and focusing on casual wear and leisure wear. So it started there, but also the business model itself. Designers are seeing that with retail stores closed, their orders are being cancelled. They in turn are having to turn to their factories and cancel their orders. So the supply chain, which is incredibly complex, has been disrupted at every stage.
Can the fashion industry survive?
It can. It's a difficult time. We commissioned a study through Oxford Economics that states that an industry that contributes 35 billion to the UK economy and was actually outpacing growth compared to the rest of the economy is risking contracting down to 26 billion. So it is a significant hit to the industry. But there is an opportunity to use this as a time to reset and for designer businesses to think about how do they rebuild on better foundations? How do they think about the future, given that they have to rethink so many of their preconceived notions? So whether it's really aligning creativity and commercial underpinnings, thinking about sustainability at the start of their journey, or really thinking about the people aspect and bringing in diversity and inclusion into what they do. This is really the silver lining and what the BFC is really pushing designers to think about.
What about job losses? The British Fashion Council employs 890,000 people, but new figures predict job losses due to the impact of COVID could be 240,000 direct jobs, possibly 350,000, including indirect roles, which would be 1% of all UK jobs. What will the short-term and long-term effects of that will be?
The job aspect of this crisis is incredibly concerning. If you think about the fashion industry, as you said, it employs close to 900,000 people. That's the same level of employment as the financial services industry. So it really is a big employer aside from its GDP contributor. And these are often young people. They are often people who are really creative and who couldn't imagine themselves in other industries. So it really does affect at all levels, whether it's retail, shop floor jobs, to also creative jobs, but also very technical skills that are very difficult to transfer into other industries. So we're thinking about mentorship, access programs, and we're really working with government to make sure that those foundations that ensure that jobs remain are supported by government. So whether it's business rate relief, rent relief, funding and loans to help with cash flow issues. These are the sorts of things we're talking to government, because it is a significant portion of the UK employed population.
Are you getting enough support from the government?
We are in constant conversations with government. We got a lot of support around London Fashion Week, and we're really talking to government, who has broadly for the UK economy done a lot in terms of its grant schemes and furlough schemes. The difficulty is that the fashion industry is very specific. It's got some very specific aspects in terms of, for example, the designers who would qualify for business support loans aren't necessarily the same as in other industries. So that is what we're talking to government now. How do you adapt to the specific aspects of the fashion industry? And we would like to have the same support and attention as the hospitality industry has. And certainly the fashion industry contributes in terms of being a huge calling card for the UK globally.
What about bricks and mortar, do you think? Because the footfall has gone from 70 to 80% in central London. What will happen?
That's a very interesting question. And actually, this debate was actually a debate that was being had pre-COVID. And in many ways, what coronavirus has done is accelerated a lot of the conversations that were happening before this crisis hit. So the concept of bricks and mortar, and whether people would be visiting the high street, whether people would take the time, those are conversations that we're getting answers in terms of, yes, there will always be that human connection needed, but stores will have to rethink their purpose. They're no longer about transactions. You can do that on the internet. They're more about the human experience, the storytelling that you can get from the fashion assistants, and the idea that a visit to a store has to be a destination. So both the designer sector and the high street will have to adapt to this new reality and be even more creative, which is something that I trust the British fashion industry to do. Creativity, innovation, resilience has always been one of the hallmarks of this industry. And now's the time to really show that.
Are you worried, though, about the death of the high street, Stephanie?
I think the high street has to adapt, and this has been, again, a conversation that has been had for a very long time. So I think there is a role for the high street. Absolutely, we need a fashion industry at all price points, but the consumer is also voting with their feet. They're asking for differentiation, and they're asking for experiences, and they're also increasingly asking for better quality and less. There's a whole sustainability angle to this. And if the high street can understand that you can create product at a good price point, but with sustainability in mind, that will be the solution to get the consumer back and really get them on side again.
Talking of sustainability, that remains a huge problem within the fashion industry. Are you disappointed more hasn't been done?
I think a lot has been done, and a lot has been done in the background. But we have to face up to the facts that the fashion industry is a large contributor to carbon emissions, that there's a lot of aspects intrinsically built into the fashion industry that we need to address. Everything from overproduction to waste, to the supply chain, to the transportation. So all of these aspects need to be addressed. A lot has been done, but I do think that crisis like we've had is forcing the topic even faster and further. And the BFC, I'm very proud to say, pre my time, my predecessor and through the CEO Caroline Rush has championed sustainability through its positive fashion. And it was always something the BFC championed. It is actually at the core of what we do now through the Institute of Positive Fashion, to provide this platform for the industry to share information, collaborate, and really start to use best practice.
And of course, diversity is a key focus at this time. How inclusive and diverse do you feel London Fashion Week really is?
I think London Fashion Week actually is. It really represents the vibrant mix of our capital, and has always been a fashion week that has come at the crossroads of art and music and fashion and design, and has really been very diverse. But the reality is that it's not just about London Fashion Week. We have to think about the fashion industry as a whole, and we have to think about not only branding and editorial, but who is sitting at the table, who are making the decisions, who's on the leadership board. And that is where we really have to put this at the top of the agenda. And it starts with us at the British Fashion Council. We've made some changes to our non-executive board. We've appointed 4 fantastic board members, including June Sarpong, who you know from the BBC, Jamie Gill, who's the CEO of Roxanda, Scott Morrison, who has his own agency, and Sean Westerman. So we've really rounded out our board with incredible skill sets. And we're thinking about our mentorship programs, our access programs, and then at the very start of the talent pipeline with our Saturday clubs, which we have run for many years, which is to give children from ethnic minority backgrounds look into the fashion industry and give them the idea that this is an industry that is open to them as well. So all of those efforts have to be a focus, and we're doing a lot, and there's still a lot to do.
Why do you think this wasn't done earlier? Why do you think it took the death of George Floyd, all the anti-racism protests, to actually focus on diversity within the fashion industry?
I think, as I mentioned, that a lot had been done, but you're right, putting it at the top of the agenda sadly often takes a big moment that galvanizes the attention, because it takes many stakeholders. There's not one decision maker clearly in the fashion industry, and it takes individual businesses rallying together to complete the whole. The analogy is very similar to the business model, and it took COVID for brands to rethink their business models. And it is very sad that it's taken a number of tragedies and an increased movement to pay attention. But that is, for me, positive, because we can now look to the future and really build upon that.
You're also Chief Customer Officer at Farfetch. How has the business been managed throughout the pandemic?
So I think one aspect of the pandemic is a structural shift to online. And we have seen that actually, to the degree that there is demand, customers are moving online. And we've seen that at Farfetch. And we're seeing that the business model at Farfetch, which connects hundreds of boutiques from around the world, has allowed these boutiques to actually continue to sell at a time when so many others were completely closed to business. Those that worked with Farfetch, we were still able to ship from store. And many of them have said this was their lifeline during the pandemic. So the business model has been very resilient to this time. And we're seeing customers really finding our proposition resonate.
Along with COVID-19, of course, you have the upcoming Brexit, potential no deal. Prior to COVID, this was one of the key issues the British fashion industry was looking at. How worried are you about that now?
Brexit remains a concern, and in particular, and I've said this before, it is the uncertainty surrounding Brexit that is difficult. And unfortunately, it's probably become the new normal. But it is the uncertainty for business that is difficult, because you find it very hard to plan. So we've been again working with government to really convey and transmit the specificities of the fashion industry around freedom of movement of people, designer IP legislation, which will change post-Brexit, to also movement of goods in a very complex supply chain. And all of these aspects are things that we've been working on behalf of the industry to really get answers and certainty, and to weigh in so that as negotiations happen, the fashion industry can be taken into account.
And how do you think that will affect some of the key markets of the industry?
I think the British fashion industry has always been outward looking and will continue to be outward looking. I think designers are making decisions around where they offshore, where they hold their warehouses, where they produce. They were always in many ways producing in Italy or in China, and they will continue to sell abroad. And we just need to hope that that the tax regime, the trade tariffs aren't negatively affecting an industry that is, again, a huge calling card for the UK in terms of brand Britain.
And this year, the British Fashion Council has pledged over £1 million to establish the BFC Foundation Fashion Fund. Tell me about that and which designers it will be supporting.
We realized very quickly that what designers really needed was that bridge funding. When COVID hit hard in March and April, we did a SNAP survey, and 60% of our designers said that they didn't think they would survive the year if they didn't have some sort of relief around that cash flow issue. So very quickly, the BFC repurposed a lot of the money that was destined for education programs and talent awards for this BFC COVID Crisis Fund, and has pledged already £1 million and now another 500,000 thanks to the generosity of patrons such as Browns and ClearPay and the Coach Foundation. So we're really grateful to our patrons, and we've been able to share that with designers such as Matty Boven, for example. So we've really been able to help a number of designers very quickly, and we're announcing another round right now.
And just finally, Stephanie, how optimistic are you that the industry can navigate, indeed survive, the effects of COVID-19 and Brexit?
I am optimistic. I think if something defines the British fashion industry, it's its resilience, how innovative it is. It's been one of those industries that has always really cut through the noise because of its creativity. And oftentimes creativity shines through in difficult times. Give a creative a box and they will do something incredible. And that is that box we live in now. The difficulties around staging Fashion Week, the difficulties around travel. But those are things that can be solved through creativity and technology. And the British Fashion Council has always pushed the envelope on digital and technology, and we're seeing the fruits of that now.
Stephanie Phair, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.